That moment when this is the third time you've promised to restart your YouTube channel and it's gone to the point where you no longer trust yourself to follow through with anything, but you promised yourself you'd start on the 1st of January 2021, and even though you spend 6 hours writing the script, your self-respect is on the line and you don't think you can take another self-betrayal, so you actually gotta do it? Hi, my name's Lucy, and welcome to my channel. It's pronounced hallucination. 2020. The year of the world remembering that Australia exists, Black lives do and still matter, hope in the United States now that Donald Trump is no longer president, and of course, the one thing on everyone's minds, a global pandemic. If you, like me, have the privilege not to be worrying about affording to live, having a job, or staying extra safe either from the police or the pandemic just in case you accidentally kill someone you love, 2020 was a year where things slowed a little bit down. Parents got to stay home with their kids. Introverts got to stay at home without having to make an excuse to come out because they're afraid of setting boundaries and hurting people's feelings. And office workers like me got to roll out of bed and turn up to Zoom meetings in their pajamas. If we focus on the positive, it wasn't all that bad. I mean, 2020 gave birth to the first ever crowdsourced TikTok musical, Ratatouille. It's premiering in a couple hours, by the way, if you want to watch it. This was the first time in our lives that we were forced to spend a lot more time at home and alone, much more than usual, which was great for a bit until the novelty wore out. And as someone who almost never stayed at home and always found an excuse to avoid being alone at home, this was when reality kicked in. 2020 was the year that a global pandemic was added to the overwhelming reality of a world experiencing a climate crisis. And God, we were not prepared. So, third time's the charm. Here are 5 lessons I've learned from 2020. Lesson number 1. Acknowledging my struggles does not mean I am weak. To this day, I still struggle to acknowledge to myself that I have ADHD, which is something I found out in June 2020. I know that some of us try and refuse to acknowledge that we are suffering, but that doesn't make us any better than people. We're just hiding from our own feelings. It's okay to acknowledge that life is hard sometimes. 2020 was a freaking hard year for everyone. It's okay to struggle and to acknowledge that struggling, to embrace that part of yourself and to know that you are flawed and you're imperfect, but that's also what makes you human, and that's what connects us all to each other because we all suffer together. Lesson number 2. Other people are also struggling. Recognizing that other people are also struggling and not judging them for that is something that we have to work on within ourselves. In order for us to express compassion to others, we must be compassionate to ourselves first. And until we can stop judging ourselves for struggling with things that we should or shouldn't be struggling with, we can't really approach others with compassion because somewhere in us, we are judging others for what we judge within ourselves. So I guess the second takeaway is to stop blaming yourself for feeling the emotions and feeling the struggles, because negative emotions are not a bad thing. Lesson number 3. Stop using the word should. There are so many expectations that we place on ourselves and we place on other people based on this vague notion of what should or shouldn't be. How many times have you laid on the couch or you were lying in bed and you were like, I should get up and do this, or I should do that? Reality is, even though you feel like you should, telling yourself and blaming yourself and making yourself feel guilty is not necessarily going to make you accomplish whatever you want to do. This is something my therapist taught me, because she was like, how does it make you feel when you say, I should do this to yourself? And I was like, well, I don't want to do it. Whenever I use should thinking, which by the way is a cognitive distortion, I really put myself in a negative headspace, which makes me even more unable to do the thing that I want to do. So what do you do instead? Instead of using the word should, say I want to. Recognize what you want to do within the task. I want to finish doing my laundry because I know then I will have fresh clothes to wear. I want to make this YouTube video. I want to stream, because at the end of the day, there is no should. Telling yourself that you should do something isn't going to make it any easier to do. So be kind to yourself, because should doesn't really exist. Lesson number 4. It's okay to feel negative emotions. This links back to the first and second points in that we should be I said should, in that in order to extend compassion to others, we need to be able to be compassionate towards ourselves and be kind to ourselves. It's okay to feel negative emotions, and we need to be able to extend kindness to ourselves. Feeling bad, although it's uncomfortable, is not necessarily a bad thing in itself. Feeling disappointed, feeling frustrated, feeling sad, feeling depressed, none of those are pleasant feelings to feel, but every emotion has a story to tell, and we need to be able to think about what our emotions are trying to tell us without judging that feeling, without feeling negative about feeling an emotion. My friend and I were having a conversation about this actually, where we were like, it's almost like when you get shot with an arrow and you are hurting and you're in pain, and instead of saying, oh no, I'm hurt, where does it hurt? How can I heal myself? We enforce this negative idea that these negative emotions are bad and that it's someone else's fault or it's our own fault. And instead of healing and instead of questioning and being curious as to where the arrow came from, we're thinking instead, why am I like this? How could I react this way? How could I feel like this? Why do I do this? And we blame ourselves, and that's basically like shooting another arrow, but from your own bow, right? You're an archer, you get shot with an arrow, and then you go and shoot another arrow because we're hurting ourselves more by questioning our own negative emotions, and by either questioning them and being like, why am I like this, and feeling this sort of shame or guilt for expressing or feeling that emotion. Or a lot of the times people do try and suppress it and dismiss it, like, this emotion is a waste of my time, or it's not that bad, I'm just going to go distract myself with something else. So instead, embrace your negative emotions with curiosity and rumble with them, as Brené Brown says in Rising Strong. And rumble with why you're feeling that negative emotion, and instead of thinking, why am I like this? Instead ask the question, what is the story I am telling myself? The 5 keywords that Brené Brown explains as the things to use when you are feeling down and you've been knocked down. The story I am telling myself. Lesson number 5, setting boundaries. Boundaries are one of the hardest things you can do because it requires you to be able to express what you need and ask for what you need without judging yourself or judging the other person, and holding a clear standard for that person and holding them accountable to the boundary that you are setting. What do I mean by setting boundaries? They can be for yourself. So, for example, I am going to do work at this time, and after this time, I'm going to stop doing work and set that boundary for myself. Because if we don't set boundaries for ourselves, we end up overworking, we end up exhausted, we end up burnt out. And I'm definitely very guilty of that. And this year has been a great learning curve, especially having to stay at home for so long, is to set those boundaries and make sure that I don't just keep working all the time, because then I'll be resentful, because I don't want to really be working all the time. So setting those boundaries and then holding myself accountable to those boundaries. And same with other people. If someone has done something to hurt you, make sure that they know. Don't accuse them of anything, but be like, hey, I felt kind of uncomfortable when you said that or when you did that. Sometimes you don't have to have something that you're asking from them, but just expressing your feelings. It's very, very difficult, and it requires a lot of courage to be vulnerable, but being able to set these boundaries is going to make your life so much better, because then you won't be holding in all that resentment from not stating what you need and not communicating your needs and respecting yourself. So that's lesson number 5. State your boundaries. State your boundaries, set your boundaries, and hold yourself accountable to them. Those are all the 5 lessons I have for you all today. It is almost the end of the 1st of January here where I am in Sydney, Australia, but I hoped you learned something from it today, and maybe this will be food for thought and you can look into some of these things that I've mentioned today. Anything from self-compassion to boundaries and vulnerability and courage, and I hope that you've learned something today. This is the first video of this channel. I'm very scared, and a part of me is like, why are you doing this? This is so bad. This sucks. But you gotta respect yourself. be kind to yourself, and know that it's all okay if everyone struggles with basically all the same things, because we're all human. And we gotta embrace those gifts of imperfection. And speaking of gifts of imperfection, if you have not read this book by Brené Brown, I would highly, highly, highly recommend. This is an incredible book that talks about everything that I've talked about today in this video. And if you want to become a better human being and kinder to yourself and be able to experience a wholehearted life, I would highly recommend reading this book, The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown. Anyways, speaking of Brené Brown, we're going to end with one of her quotes, which is, "Sometimes the bravest and most important thing you can do is just to show up." So thank you for showing up with me today, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Happy New Year, happy 2021, and I'll see you later. Bye!